We have spotted Imperial walkers.
In 1977, the Atari 2600 was introduced. And while it was not the first device to bring video games to your television, following the Odyssey and video entertainment system, it popularized the cartridge-based method of consoles that still exists today. The 2600 launched with 9 games and eventually sold over 30 million units. On May 25th of the same year, 20th Century Fox released a science fiction epic from the writer and director of American Graffiti and THX 1138. The film took place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It told the story of a young moisture farmer named Luke Skywalker, an aspiring starfighter pilot who was destined to join a struggling rebellion, confront an evil empire, and learn the ways of the Force like his father before him. Star Wars was produced for $11 million. It became the best-selling motion picture of its time and went on to gross almost $800 million worldwide. The brand took over lunchboxes, backpacks, shirts, socks, sheets, pillows, pajamas, toothbrushes, wallpapers, novels, comic books, Halloween costumes, action figures, trading cards, board games, and just about every other consumer product. The merchandising phenomenon only grew as the subsequent Star Wars sequels were released.
Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back is the first video game released by Parker Brothers, the company best known for their board game Monopoly. This translation of the Imperial walkers scene from the popular Star Wars film shows that Parker Brothers still has what it takes to please the public.
Despite the franchise's chokehold on the children's collectible market, a video game depicting the events from the trilogy wouldn't arrive until 1982. Following the 1980 release of Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, with the meager resources of the 2600, Atari and Parker Brothers made a simple flight game that attempted to recreate the rebels' desperate escape from the Imperial invasion of the ice planet Hoth. Without the performance capabilities to render the entire snowspeeder fleet, Luke was all alone against a never-ending train of slow but steady all-terrain attack transports, or AT-ATs. Each had 48 hit points with 5 colored stages of speed and accuracy. Every now and then a weak point would appear in one of 3 places that would allow the player to take the walkers down in one shot. Unlike the film, Luke could shoot the approaching laser fire out of the air to avoid taking damage, and his craft could only survive a maximum of 5 direct hits. Whenever your speeder went from purple to yellow, you could drop into a gap in the rocky surface to regenerate. And when the Star Wars theme chimed in, you gained a glowing, impenetrable shield for 20 seconds. As the first Star Wars game, Empire remained faithful to the minor spot of the movie it imitated, became one of the 2600's most popular titles of '82, and remains among the most revered Star Wars games for those who are old enough to remember playing it. In July of 1983, 2 months after Episode 6, Return of the Jedi arrived in theaters, gamers got to rewind to the climax of the first film. Using color vector graphics, Star Wars Arcade depicted the final assault on the Death Star from the cockpit of Luke's X-Wing. 2 different cabinets were created. One was upright, and the other was a sit-down encased model. Both were controlled by a spinning yoke with handlebars that rotated back and forth. The arcade unit was published by Atari and developed by Mike Halley, who also designed Blasteroids and Gravatar. Gameplay was strung out in a never-ending cycle of 3 stages. The first approached the space station against a wave of enemy ships, including Darth Vader's TIE Advanced. The second navigated the surface of the Death Star through torpedo-shooting towers, and the third sped through the narrow trench full of gun turrets. The game was a rarity in its genre because you didn't have to blast a specific number of targets, you just had to survive until the end. quick pilots could zap enemies before they fired their torpedoes or shoot the sparkly projectiles themselves in defense.
I've lost our cue!
If you made it to the end of the trench and landed a proton shot in the exhaust port opening, you got to see the great Imperial weapon explode in a wave of multicolored circles. The victory was short-lived, however, because immediately after winning, you started back at the beginning. Repeat run-throughs increased the difficulty by adding more fighters, torpedoes, towers, turrets, and barriers to avoid. Point bonuses were awarded to the pilots who could destroy all the towers or survive the final stage, only firing the one necessary shot. Although the game got tougher, there was no real ending. In 2005, 25-year-old Brandon Erickson set the world record by making one credit last for 54 hours. The original arcade release still stands out today among the piles of Star Wars video games as one of the only entries to use audio quotes directly from the film. Lines delivered by Mark Hamill, Alec Guinness, Harrison Ford, and James Earl Jones were all hardwired into the simulation. Their characters were commonly recast by voice actors in the decades following.
Yahoo! You're all clear, kid!
But not every Star Wars game in 1983 required quarters. Over the years, fans would be introduced to various methods of lightsaber control, but their first training ground was Star Wars Jedi Arena on the 2600. Dueling against the computer or another Jedi, the red or blue Padawan had to deflect energy bursts from a mobile training droid while simultaneously shocking their opponent. The bolt of electricity would travel in the direction the saber was pointing, so it was impossible to play offensively and defensively at the same time. Every so often, the flying target would unload its energy in various directions, forcing both players to stay on their guard. Layers of blocks in front of both rivals were zapped away one by one until an opening became exposed and the final shot could be delivered. Although it felt vaguely reminiscent of Luke's brief training aboard the Millennium Falcon in Episode 4, Jedi Arena wasn't exactly the type of lightsaber action fans were hoping for. US audiences wouldn't get to wield one in virtual combat again for another 8 years.
Oh, and nobody don't let me down.
Everything else in the 80s was vehicle-based, starting with the second arcade game in 1984. Following the climax of Episode 6, Return of the Jedi Arcade jettisoned the vector graphics engine for a rail-driven isometric shooter in the vein of 1982's Zaxxon.
Yes, yes!
The 4 challenging areas were unmistakably pulled from the film, including a speeder bike chase and AT-ST assault through the Ewok forest, along with a flight in the Falcon past a Star Destroyer and through the center of the second Death Star. Superior reflexes and a gradual memorization of the various obstacles were required to prolong your credit and make it through the repeating stages. Aside from its colorful, detailed ships and environments, Return of the Jedi Arcade stood out by transitioning back and forth between the Imperial fleet and the surface of Endor, similar to how the scenes were spliced in the movie. Episode 6 also inspired 2 more titles for the Atari 2600 that year, although only one of them made it into stores. Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle put pilots in control of the Millennium Falcon as it made its desperate attack on the second Death Star. The first of the game's 2 stages began underneath a multicolored block barrier that opened up once the Falcon could finish off enough of the attacking Imperial fleet. Once through the field, the Death Star was open to attack, provided the Falcon could dodge more incoming fighters and shuttles, along with blasts from the fully operational battle station. Burrowing a hole through the station's hull and nailing the target in the center led to victory and starting the whole thing over. Although Death Star Battle became a cartridge, Ewok Adventure never materialized. Representing the other half of the fight, players would have controlled a hang-gliding, rock-dropping Ewok, aiming to destroy the Death Star's shield generator single-handedly, a feat that never even came close to being accomplished in the movie. The game was publicly discovered in 1997 by a man whose father had a friend that worked at Parker Brothers. The prototype he found was playable, but brief. By 1985, the 3 entries in the Star Wars trilogy had experienced both a home console and arcade translation, except for one. Building on the engine used by Atari for Episode 4, The Empire Strikes Back arrived in arcades 2 years after the last film was released. Empire Arcade never got its own stand-up unit, however, and was released as a conversion kit to the original Death Star attack. Unlike Red 5's solitary perspective, Empire Strikes Back followed both Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, as they did their part in escaping Hoth. Luke started Stage 1 hunting down Imperial probes, and once the cavalry arrived, spent Stage 2 tow-cabling AT-ATs. Stage 3 followed Han chased into the stars by a legion of TIE fighters. To escape them, the Falcon took a detour in Stage 4 through an unpredictable asteroid field. Getting both heroes to safety took you back to Stage 1 and gradually ramped up the difficulty as the levels repeated. Each stage awarded 1 letter from the word Jedi if you eliminated a certain number of Imperial ships. When you earned the letter, enemy fire would be silenced for a short period of time, and stripes would be added to your name if you made the high score list.
He will join us or die.
With the events from the original Star Wars trilogy too epic to contain in a pocket-sized cartridge or even a full-sized cockpit, the early Star Wars games were forced to recreate specific looped events from the movies for as long as you could keep playing. But no matter the scale, the marriage of these two entities, Star Wars and video games, was a powerful combination. One solidified the notion of a blockbuster, a property that had the potential to make infinitely more money than it took to produce. The other had a slower start, but it would eventually become the fastest-growing medium in popular entertainment. So there was no question that these two beings would meet again, somewhere in the cosmos, whether they searched for more realistic ways to bring those classic moments to life, or branched out to tell brand new stories of their own. Strike back in 2 weeks as we unveil the next retrospective episode as the series builds up to the fall release date of Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. In Episode 2, we'll take a stolen speeder bike ride through every game released after 1984 that was directly related to the episodes of the original trilogy. Among these are the unusual Namco Famicom translation, the Empire's comeback on the NES, the action-packed saga of the Super Nintendo, and the customizable building block sequel.